It's time for us, for we the people, to come together. And make no mistake, united we can and will overcome this season of darkness in America. We'll choose hope over fear, facts over fiction.
This was basically the entirety of Biden's speech. Vacuous, empty platitudes. And, you know, there's a reason that mainstream media loves the speech, that the political class loves the speech, that the oligarchs that pay both of those loves this speech. It basically, and honestly, they love the speech for the exact reason that lefties, and honestly, the entirety of the American public should find it to be an insulting slap in the face. It is basically, it gives nothing of material. Meaning, despite all of these platitudes, despite all of these tonal notes, where you can feel something, this is hope over fear, this day of darkness, those type of ideas, those type of things, what gives you that imagery and that feeling associated with it, with the undertone of get rid of Trump and give Biden, of course they'd love it. It's a return to the status quo. If you're part of the top 5% and we're doing well, economically stable, you had the money to do the things that you need, you had an exorbitant amount of cash, but you didn't have to deal with a belligerent Trump in that office. You want the mask back on. You want status quo. But the catch here is, as I said before, lefties and the American public don't. They want something fundamentally different. They want something that attends to the needs of the population. And, you know, when I make this argument that these guys are extremists, meaning the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, I don't pull that out of thin air. I pull that because the majority of the Americans are very clear in what they want regarding policy, especially when you ask them from the standpoint of polling. For example, this. Right here. 72% expand Social Security, 69% Medicare for all, 67% $15 minimum wage, 67% legalize marijuana, 64% to tax extreme wealth, 64% support unions, 63% support a Green New Deal, 58% support canceling all student debt and making public colleges and universities free. Now, instead of Joe Biden going out and giving a speech for America, giving a speech saying, I am going to do these things as your president, I am going to give a people's agenda. No, he gave an empty, vacuous speech that basically signaled to the top upper class that, as he said before, nothing is going to fundamentally change. We're going to go back to the status quo Obama era. That speech was directed to that upper 5% of America, the upper class of America. Despite the tones and the notes and the feeling imagery that was involved in it, used to also try to con everyone else. Listen to the speech for yourself. He invokes his dead son for health care when he doesn't support Medicare for all. And honestly, trying to cut Social Security for the bulk of his career. He brings up issues of the Green New Deal. He brings up issues of unity. When we are not a United States with the gross level of income disparity, something else that he also brought up, that him and Obama giving 95% of income to the top 1% and continuing the trends and the policies that have basically elevated the amount of money that will go to the hands of the rich as opposed to the poor, or for that matter, the middle class. We, us, the rest of the public, that have a clear interest in getting these things, and in the middle of multiple crises. This is kind of my point, right? That basically the media and the political class have all the money in the world. And from their standpoint, they don't want their economic situation impacted. That speech makes it plainly clear that it would not be. On top of that, making that plainly clear that it would not be, Joe Biden offers nothing. And that's the reason why it makes it clear. It also makes it clear that you have no leverage in this process. You have nowhere else to go from the standpoint of the Democratic Party. And with all of the crises that avail us, all of these people out of a job, with 30 million people out of a job, all of these people without health care, like 10, 20 million people without health care, all of these people being dragged and thrown from their homes, all of these people being ill. And instead of giving a speech for America that says, look, I am going to deal with these issues. I am Joe Biden. Recognize that these are problems that need to be ameliorated immediately. And I am going to use the legitimacy of all of this pain to make America great. Or for that matter, make the changes that you are screaming for. That wasn't that speech. That should have been that speech. That wasn't that speech. Vacuous, empty, inert. That's all it was. The media, political class, yes. He's not going to adversely affect my wallet. And he, at the very least, offers Joe Biden, whatever that means, as a status quo political figure. And yeah, I'm sorry, status quo is no longer enough. Status quo is no longer enough. I'm going to show you some of the establishment responses to Joe Biden's speech. And in these responses, I kind of want to make just a very basic point of how it's not a United States. It never was a United States. There are things that we need that is not being expressed in a political space. Disparities from the standpoint of income inequality, of even health. We have like 5-to-1 deaths in this country based on, let's say, economic-driven health disparities. I'm making the point that at a time where all of these crises avail us, the only thing Joe Biden offers is Joe Biden. My point of view is that is unacceptable. But from the media, they love it. Politicians love it. I'm going to build an argument here based on this notion of conformity and why the media goes into this propaganda pushing Joe Biden. Basically, it's astonishing, honestly. Like, consider it for the moment that Joe Biden would tokenize and he would use he was used as a perch. Trauma. Listen to the speech. When he's talking about the crisis of inequality, that's millions, tens of millions of people. When he's talking about all of these people dying from COVID, we're talking about over 170-something thousand people, not to mention millions of people being impacted. When we're talking about racial or civil rights, again, this is tens of millions of people. And honestly, Joe Biden lying about civil rights in the 80s was offensive, and him going back to that lie in 2020 without anybody calling it back was appalling. And the issues of inequality and everything else, those are notes that Joe Biden was willing to hit, but that is desperation and trauma, isolated to those individuals that are experiencing it, and the invocation of it without having any actual policy, or for that matter, any actual real agenda with a mandate of sorts to deal with those things. It's offensive to even reference them. That's kind of what I'm getting at. It's a slap in the face because ultimately, instead of giving a speech talking about what you are going to do in specific terms, you basically gave flowery rhetoric. And people, at this point, I can only take it as, that's because policy is not the agenda here. What I'm going to do is give you Joe Biden, which is basically status quo. And there we have it. And media, political class, the rich and the wealthy, that is perfectly acceptable. And so they love it. But the people who are in this country who are in desperate straits based on the political class, the very people that Joe Biden had tried out on that stage giving those speeches, that speech for them should be cold water, because it means that basically the status quo, where the over half of the country was basically poor, will be what we're going back to. And if you don't want to vote for that, then you can get Trump. It's a hostage scenario. 88% of Democrats are backing Medicare for all. And if you had tens of millions of people that stood behind that banner saying you don't get our vote unless you back this particular policy, Joe Biden probably would be willing to tank it. And the Democratic Party would be willing to tank it for Trump, as opposed to organizing around a policy that the overwhelming majority of the American public support, almost in unanimity for Democrats, but it's 70% for the rest of the country. And he would take it. My point is that's a partisan move. That's an ideologically driven move, every bit as much as ideological as the Republican Party, in not accepting policy and not going after the thing that actually does the job that the overwhelming majority of the American public wants. This is not a representative government in the very sense of the American public. That speech was going to the people who are represented in Joe Biden's eyes. But it wasn't you. It was not the poor. It was not the middle class. It was nothing. But that nothing was absolutely there because that void or that space filler of, how the president is and basically the status quo norm is what they crave. We, everybody else who's in the public, who's looking at things that need to be fixed and that were perpetuated going all the way up to the point where Trump got elected, we don't want status quo. And we even recognize to some degree that the entire reason that Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump exist in the first place is entirely for status quo and who was being enriched and who was being undermined. So now Biden is running. And Biden looks at it kind of like Hillary. I have my own policy ideas. I don't care what the American public wants. And I'm going to do what I do in that office. You're not going to have any leverage in the process. And maybe in 4 years, we can talk about it again. But then I'm going to do the scaremongering thing and tell you how bad Republicans are. That's my playbook. I get a ton of money from the wealthy oligarchs. I spend my days and nights talking and begging those people for cash. And I know that if I do good by them, that they will give me money again, and not just give me money again. If my son, if somebody else needed a job, if somebody needed a favor or anything else, they'll be there for me because I was there for them. That's the focus. That's who he's working for. That's who that speech was for. It wasn't for us. That should give you a heads up on what is coming if a Biden administration gets in office. Biden is just going to be Biden, whatever that means. And they're already talking austerity. They've already started walking back off of their pledges because what they understand is now the race is mano a mano. And everything that they were saying in the primary will get forgotten like an amnesiac, like it never took place. And whatever Biden does in that office, you have no leverage to do anything about. Hell, he could privatize Social Security himself. And they would still run the same argument that whoever is running against them is a monster. And you must vote for Joe Biden regardless of what he did in that office. And I'm saying that is a ludicrous proposition. I'm going to have to cut all of this because all of this had nothing to do with the major topic. My main point, and the point that I'm going to try to build and develop here, though, has to do with basically why the media acts the way the media does. The role, the point of the media is not just to impart information. It's also to impart point of view and narrative. A point of view of narrative that is not necessarily indicative of the American public, but more so indicative of their class and what their class is talking about and discussing. Even when they talk about politics, meaning left and right, they're not talking about the majority of the population, even though they may say it in those terms. They're talking about a small 1% of the population, the oligarchs, the wealthy, the people that basically pay politicians to be their frontmen. That's what they're talking about. If they say, hey, Joe Biden is a moderate, Jeb Bush is a moderate, what does that mean, moderate? And what are the policy issues that are associated with that term of moderate? And how do you put that in context of an American public that is further to the left? Meaning your scale doesn't even apply for what the American public wants. Now, if you ask the American public about one of your issues, they may get into it and everything else, but you don't ask them the questions that are necessary to get the point of view of the American population where you can get an idea on, okay, where their thinking is. Because my point is, in regards to what's talked about in the media, that is just a class of people imparting a narrative to everyone else. And whether that narrative is true, false, or some level of nuance, it's still that. So when they are looking at the speech and they're making arguments for the speech, they're looking at it in terms of their own life, in terms of the things that they need and they want in the world. One of those things being to eliminate Trump and get rid of Trump. And they need to make you believe it, whether they believe it or not. And so they come up and they make their arguments. Now, you must understand, one of the things that is endemic, or let's say intrinsic to being a human being, is our appraisal of the world around us. Oftentimes, we use other people to give us an idea on what's real and what's not real. So a perspective that is given and that is blown up and that is exaggerated and made to this huge thing enforced over and over and over and over in this kind of repetitive way will give you an idea, especially when it's coded in this notion of America or us or united, will give a general idea or impart something that that person either accepts, rejects, or at the very least interacts with. But at that point, that becomes an argument and the topic of conversation. The other items that are big, that are necessary and everything else, those things may be off the table. But that media source chooses. And the things that they often chooses are not the things that are directly related or even the major public care about. If you are about to lose your house, or for that matter, getting thrown out of the house, if you have no idea where the next rent payment is coming, if your insulin is held up because these guys were screwing around with the mail, or for that matter, other medication, if you are a college student with the temerity to get an education, you were punished for that to the tune of 40, 50,000 on your back, you don't give a shit about a lot of the stuff that these guys talk about. You don't care because it doesn't materially affect your life when your life is being materially impacted by the various things that avail you. But why would they talk about it? If you're Chuck Todd and making, I don't know how many millions, or Rachel Maddow making, I don't know how many millions, or even just the regular news going throughout the day making, I don't know how many millions, you don't care about homelessness. You don't care. You may intellectually, you don't care about the fact that person has $60,000 on their back. You don't care that that person is about to get thrown out of their house. You may care about it in an intellectual way. But from the standpoint of the way you operate and peruse the world, you will be able to send your kid to school. You will be able to pay any healthcare bill that comes out. You have all the cash in the world to ensure you have all the agency in the world to do what you want to do in your life. So why talk about these issues of poverty? Why talk about the vagaries of this country when those things are not necessarily present in your mind? It's rational. I don't like it. I think it's deplorable, but it's rational. I also accept that I think it's deplorable because I grew up in poverty and I have a very specific idea of what the world looks like. But if you're looking at Fox, if you're looking at CNN, if you're looking at MSNBC, those people are polished. Those people are paid by oligarchs to give a perspective of the world and ensure that a narrative is created that they themselves care about, at the very least care about in terms of not having a narrative on this notion of poverty, or this notion of inequality of wealth, on this notion of people sleeping on the streets. Those things, those disasters and dramas, those aren't things that they want to talk about. So they talk about the things they care about. And they give that to you as if that's a narrative of America. It is a narrative of a top 0.1% of America. It is not the narrative of everyone else. You have a problem then. If we are the 1%, and if we, for the most part, don't want that to change, and we want to continue to get these politicians to put forth policy and everything else that we like, we want to continue with a media arm ignoring main issues that affect America, especially if it would affect issues of poverty and my wallet. So how do you do that? Well, the media arm in and of itself creates a narrative of the United States. And if you argue and talk about it as if you're united and this is objective and this guy's a moderate, then you can impart an opinion on the public that they often may accept as real just because of the impact and the amount of repetition that goes into imparting that point of view. There's an experiment. It's called the Ash experiment. Basically, what they would do is they would, God damn it, I got rid of it. But basically, what they would do is put a person in a room, and they would have a bunch of other people come into that room, and all of them sitting there. They know there's going to be this kind of experiment. And what they do is that they say, look, it says, all right, here's 3 lines. And we want you to tell us either which line is longest or which line matches the line on the other side. Meaning, you have 3 lines, A, B, C. You have a line to the left. Which one is the line that matches? Now, let's say you have 15 or 10 participants in a room. And as you go down the line, one person says, well, I think B matches. I think B is equal to the one to the left. The next person, I think B is equal to the one to the left. The next person, I think A is. The next person, I think C is. Next person, I think B is. Next person, B. and all down the line B, which is clearly wrong. And they would ask you, the person who's the actual person in the experiment, which one do you think it is? And roughly 30% will say B. They know it's wrong. They know it is not a correct appraisal. In their heads, they are like, what's wrong with these people? C is clearly the answer, but they will say B, because the pressure of the group in regards to the acknowledgement of a reality was more, and basically changed that person's point of view of the world. Meaning, he understood it was wrong, but he didn't necessarily want to go against the will and perspective of the group. And the assumption was, maybe the group knows something I don't, so I am going to put the wrong answer. If you get a situation like that, where you can get about 20-30% of people to do that, and you are part of a media space where you put out information to create a narrative and then push that narrative hard, you will get a percentage of people that will say, okay, if all of these people saying it's true, maybe I'm missing something, maybe it is. Which is, in part, the reason why the media is going to come out so ebullient for something that was extraordinarily empty, especially in context to what's going on outside. Understand what I'm saying here. You have multiple Great Depressions, and Biden addressing America after becoming the nominee gives you a speech that is empty. And despite announcing what those failures and problems are, there is nothing tangibly there policy-wise, or even agenda, or for that matter, even big idea that you're running on in order to change all of this and deal with all of these crises. No, it's, I give you Joe Biden. Walks off stage. So the media has to do this, because what the media wants is for people to be complicit and to say, all right, yeah, maybe that speech was good. Maybe I was missing something. Maybe I saw that wrong. In order to pull whatever percentage of people they could over to the idea that the speech was something when it emphatically was not. And again, especially in the context of all of these people out of their jobs, all of these people without health care, all of these people out there protesting and marching for the past 50, 60 days, all of these people that have died, all of these people that are ill, in the context of that, vacuousness, and the media pushing that vacuousness as great. Let's hear Chris Wallace first. This is Chris Wallace.
Remember, Donald Trump has been talking for months about Joe Biden as mentally shot, a captive of the left. And yes, Biden was reading from a teleprompter and a prepared speech, but I thought that he blew a big hole in that characterization. You talked about the line that character is on the ballot, decency is on the ballot. He talked about a different path for the country. Not in a deep programmatic sense, but he did talk about plans for the virus and the economy, for climate change and race and foreign policy. And he talked about what a united America can do to accomplish all of those things. It seems to me that after tonight, Donald Trump is going to have to run against a candidate, not a caricature.
Chris Wallace accepting the speech. And he even told you, he says, look, it's giving you a new path. It's giving you, and Chris Wallace starts to go into platitudes that that Joe Biden was talking about. It offers nothing. But again, if you are rich, if you have the things that you need, you have accessibility to all of these things around you from the standpoint of the world, and you hear a speech like that, you're not looking for anything significant. You're not looking for a change. You're not looking for a revolution. You're looking for status quo without a belligerent president. And so if Chris Wallace looks at that, he's like, yeah, I like that. I like that. Why wouldn't he like that? It gives him what he wants. Nothing. Status quo. Let's go to the other side of the aisle. Let's go to the lefty side of the aisle. And let's see how the lefties, at least people who call them lefties, responded to the speech. So this is Van Jones. Listen to Van Jones talk about how awesome Joe Biden's speech was. Again, lefty. I don't know Van Jones' wealth factor, but look, if you are the 42% before COVID-19 hit that was making $18,000 a year. If you were one of those people that was struggling and pushing for $15 an hour, if you were one of those people that were advocating for Medicare for all because of your own experience with healthcare in this country, if you were pushing for a Green New Deal because you were terrified that your world was going to come to an end, meaning an existential threat, if you were one of those people that wanted a wealth tax reinvestment into this country from the standpoint of infrastructure, if you were one of those people, it is rational, as rational could be, especially in the context of all of the crises that are availing us, to push and want for those things. It is also to some degree rational for a wealth of America that benefited from this country not having those things and basically don't care about those things because those things are things that they necessarily need, they can pay for them, to come out and be effusive in regards to praise for the speech because ultimately they're set. The issue here is that their appraisal of the speech or applauding this particular speech is for the exact reasons, like I said, the lefties and other people who actually need real things and needs a party and a presidency and somebody to represent their interests in earnest terms, to go out there and be a warrior for them. And those people is not going to get that, which is what that speech gets across, emphatically so. Status quo. What I'm going to give you is basically not Trump. That's what this presidency is going to be about. And they're like, yes, thank you. But the other people who actually need those things, who are in dire straits, should be appalled that what is supposed to be a political dimension that is supposed to represent their interests, especially in the context of a crisis, that have basically made them an afterthought while using them as props in its appraisal to the wealthy class. Yeah, this was, they can applaud it all they want. And I understand that from the standpoint of class, yeah, they may love that speech. But from the standpoint of a public that recognizes that it is in crisis and was so even before Trump took office, the speech is appalling. Like I said, offensively empty in context of where we are. But let's hear Van Jones, who loved this vacuous, empty speech.
You hear all across the country is the sound of Democrats exhaling. That's what that is. People would have accepted anything. We just wanted Joe to get out there. So, sometimes when he gets out there, you're afraid he's going to make a mistake. He's going to have a gaffe. The expectations are just so low. And then he came out there and he gave an extraordinary speech. Listen, first of all, it's very tough just to do the biography. It's very tough to do policy. Very tough to do attack and contrast. Almost impossible to do all three well. He did all three well, and it was authentic. It was an extraordinary speech. And we were prepared for it to be a terrible speech. As long as he didn't embarrass himself, we were going to come out here and praise it. You don't have to make nothing up tonight. Joe Biden did that thing tonight. Unbelievable.
Governor?
Unbelievable.
Governor?
Did you hear what he just said? That's astonishing. A few points. As long as Joe Biden wasn't going to come out of here and make an ass out of himself, we were going to praise him. That's how low the bar was set. And he's also basically telling you, regardless of what was going to happen in that speech, we were going to applaud it, which is kind of my point. If you're trying to get a public and a narrative to conform, then yeah, that's the behavior that you take. You have a bunch of Democrats, come on, you have CNN, MSNBC, and all these guys, and even to some degree Chris Wallace say, hey, this is great. And so if you're sitting there like, that sucked, well, their megaphone is louder than yours, and there will be a probability of people that will acquiesce and say, okay, maybe that was great. Maybe I missed something. That's the reason for this. He just gave you the background. As long as he didn't fall over and his pants fell down, we were going to give him a good, praise him. We were going to praise him. Basically, regardless of what he came out and said, we were going to clap and give him applaud. Van Jones could have said exactly what he said just there, regardless of what happened or what Joe Biden said in that speech. And that's the sad part. On the left spectrum and on the right spectrum, you have people praising a man with the lowest bar in history. In fact, Joe Biden, his speech was less, the shortest acceptance speech since 1984. Hillary's speech was longer than his. Obama's speech was longer than his. So There was some degree of brevity, but I suppose if you had nothing to say and nothing to offer, why are you just going to stand up there and waste time? I suppose there's only so many platitudes and vacuousness that you can put in one speech. And so, yeah, that's how it is. My very basic point, media's job is to give you information, but oftentimes it goes into getting you to conform to a particular position. While it can't get everybody to conform to the position, you don't need everybody. Your objective is to just get as many as you possibly can. They will put a position out. They will have a megaphone to back that position, and they would repeat that position over and over and over again. They would have various people come on. They would talk about it as if this is America. And that is a way of setting and instantiating a narrative, whether it's true or whether it's not. Listen to Biden's speech for yourself. Listen to their appraisal. Listen to my appraisal. My appraisal is it was empty. And if you are one of those people that are in desperate straits, you should be massively offended by him using you basically as a prop to offer nothing material for those situations. So that's where we are. That's where we are. Gaslighting at best. It's a rational act to do, by the way, whether or not you think it's appalling. It is a rational action based on what they're trying to accomplish, which is to get you to vote for Joe Biden. And they need you to love it conceptually in your own head, as if you were not being pushed by making the argument that America believes X or America believes Y. Let's go to some super chats, because this video has gone monstrously long. Yeah, monstrously long. It's going to have to be cut. All right, so we have, let's see. They're pushing an old broken Trojan horse. Cover up! Xavier Foster. Obi Alfred. Please lock up AOC tweet praising Kamala. Its history in the making tells you, oh, tell me your thoughts. That was a thing, praising Kamala. Look, same thing. My thoughts are exactly the same as me talking about this video. Democrats' job, to some degree, are to help their people get in office. And whether they are ideologically in alignment or not, when it comes to basically an election, there is all sorts of pressure that is put on people, regardless of their political ideologies, to back whoever that particular candidate is. AOC is a Democrat. She considers herself a Democrat, even though she may be part of the DSA. And as such, yeah, she will give accolades and praise and support to Joe Biden, whether or not she agrees with him or not. Yeah, I think it's the same process. She's a Democrat. She has a D beside her side. It would be weird if having a D beside your name and not helping the Democrat. Now, I would make the point that at some point there needs to be that. There needs to be this level of singularity among lefties in pushing back or accepting a particular policy proposal if they're willing to get anything real accomplished. And look, I've said this before. It incentivizes your own being taken advantage of. It's one thing if you said, I'm standing under this banner of policy. And then to be fair, let's not go there, because ultimately AOC is a little in a different box. She considers herself a Democrat, so she aligns herself with Democrats. That's all I think of it. I don't like it. I would prefer they take more of a, let's say, belligerent tenor in regards to pushing for the things that they care about. But no, if it was a different world where third-way Democrats were not in power, then, well, yeah, like I said, that doesn't apply. Scratch all that. No, what I think about it is she has a D beside her name. She's backing the Democratic candidate. It would be weird if she didn't. But if AOC, if Sanders, if all of these lefties really did want to get their policy agenda accomplished, what they would do is to not give that support for nothing. They would give that support in lieu of policy, and they would negotiate that. The media would hate it. Democratic Party will scream about it. But at the end of the day, if you're standing there saying, look, here's what America wants, you're out of sync of America. And if you are willing to tank this election instead of coalescing and bringing this party together in an organic way, and you would rather instead lose to Donald Trump, that is abominable in and of itself. And you need to explain in real terms why you're holding America hostage and why you're willing to do that. Until lefties start making those type of counter arguments where they frame it in a way that they are in the best light, frame it in a way where America is in the best light, and push for policies that the overwhelming agenda of the American agrees with, even if you isolate yourself to those policies. That's one way to play politics, and that's one way to negotiate, and that's one way to try to get the candidate to appropriate your agenda and your aims. That's not what they're doing. That's not what they're doing. Wesley Walker, those who don't want it are usually the right ones for the job. Just saying, JT. I hear you, Wesley. I hear you. I'm going to end this because this video has gone way, way, way too long. So I'm just going to say like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thanks, everyone.